celebrity amongst us, which is none other than our own. As Anand was mentioning, he is not a guest, he is one of our own selves. But it's wonderful to have him today in a very, very different avatar that anybody would have imagined him to be in. And I was equally surprised when I first got this message on my WhatsApp saying that my book is getting published and it's available on these platforms. And so here we are, and I'm very delighted to welcome Kannan Srinivasan over to this session. It's very interesting. We all know about the various gurus who are now doing the rounds, especially Sadhguru or Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, at a very, very different scale altogether. But I could never have imagined that somebody from our own batch, very, very well-set corporate professional, a leader, could take on to a subject like spirituality. And not just that, he has woven this concept into a very, very well-written fiction, which is what we have come to know as Boston Brahmin. Now, here is where I'm going to stop, and I'm going to be shooting off some questions to Kannan. And let's hear from the horse's mouth in terms of what exactly happened and what does he feel about various aspects about spirituality. So here we go. Kannan, welcome once again. Are you there? Let me ask you, the first thing is, as a corporate professional, how did you really evolve into a spiritual enthusiast? And how did you ever think of becoming an author on spirituality? Really interesting to know from you.
No, this is a subject that's always fascinated me for various reasons. Small and validate as to what influenced me. When we stayed on our campus, we had very close by, about 60 kilometers away from us, the Brihateshwarar temple in Tanjore. Now, what fascinated me about the temple was, how is it that about 1,020 years back, it got constructed? When we dug in as to what went into it, we saw a tower of 261 feet high, on which sat a spherical, basically stone weighing about 81 tons, and that basically held the structure in place, with very less of steel used those days. Interesting part is, without the sort of handling equipment that we have today, cranes and whatever else, how did that happen? The second example is, there is this very interesting star. It was referred to as Jeshta in the Puranas. Now, Jeshta star, if you try and identify it in the sky, it's apparently the 15th most luminous star, but apparently it's the largest. It is apparently of size that is 40,000 times that of our sun. And if you go back into our Vedic literature, it is referred to by the rishis of the good old days, and so on and so forth. The other interesting part is we talk about the distances of the Earth from the various stars in terms of some millions and millions of light years. Now, how is it possible for us to sit back some, say, 15,000 to 20,000 years and try and ascertain distances with a fair element of accuracy? Then one got to understand that everything is through a process of introspection. And therefore, the subject started interesting me. And it also got triggered and probably accentuated by some interactions I did have. For example, I had this famous creator of movies from Sri Lanka who was a guest with me sometime in late 1998. And this particular gentleman passed on a book to me. It's Living with the Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. I just started browsing through it. And then I was wondering as to what these rishis and these evolved souls were doing up there in the Himalayas. The stories and their experiences that were captured were fairly fascinating. And finally, closer home, 80 kilometers from Chennai is this place called Kanchipuram, which we are all very aware of. 5 kilometers from Kanchipuram is this place called Orikkai. Now, Orikkai, I have had personal experiences in seeing the way the temple came up. That particular temple has stones that are stacked over each other, and they are stuck to each other by a glue that is made of basically good and bananas. It's a paste of good and banana, and that's how they are stacked up. And the gentleman who was behind this project, a highly evolved soul who stays in Chennai, he said, I provide a warranty of 4,000 years for this particular temple. Now, this all existed in our Puranas. And they say that all the scientists that you refer to of the good old periods were actually rishis. Now, rishis, how did they evolve? They basically then evolved by learning out of the Vedas. And therefore, it's a subject that has always fascinated me. Okay, I never manifested this particular desire to understand and dwell deep. I don't have a lot of time for myself. And therefore, I thought, let me try and gain a better understanding of this particular space.
Yeah, and then, as they say, the Battle of Waterloo was won in the playgrounds of Eton. That's what they say when they talk about Nelson. I think the spirituality seeds were sown in Tuvakudi when you were studying in REC, and Vaideshwara temple attracted you to this point of what we had mentioned about just now. Right? So, over to that evolution in terms of what brought you, or what were those instances and facts that had your attention all through. So when was exactly this idea or a trigger to write a book actually born in your mind? When was it?
Okay, I mean, when I would travel around, I would capture a few things on my iPad. And over a period of time, I had accumulated quite a lot of information. And this extended period I spent in Boston some years back, I had a lot of free time. And that's when I thought, let me try and see if I'm able to try and put this together in some form. One thing led to another, and then I did ended up probably writing a few chapters, and I left it there. I gave it a hiatus of probably almost a year, till someone caught me this January when I was in Chennai. The person apparently was aware of something that I'd captured, and this lady encouraged me to take it to a conclusion. But then the huge barrier in my mind was the horror of interacting with publishers. They typically turn the entire script upside down, and they try and strongly influence your writing. So that was a huge barrier. And she said, no, let me attempt and see if there's interest that then comes through. One thing led to another, and then it then took a final shape, came out end of August. But the completion of the book happened sometime in March quarter this year. But I commenced it probably about 3 years back.
Great to know that, because such a product that comes out after so many years of watchful thinking or analysis and interconnectedness that you try to bring in to make it really available as the form of a book is something fantastic. And I've actually gone through your book, and I'll come to that later in the last part of the session. But before that, was it a story script that you had in the form of a 4-liner or a 5-liner, and then really exploded it into chapters and characters? How did all the chapters take shape? How are the characters born? How did the flow and the creation happen really?
Excellent. Senthil, yeah. Sorry, if let's say the 5 years that we all were together in a campus, we all went through these challenges. mostly mental, got to do with the stresses that we then experience around us. We also had a great time living with each other and then living off each other and then having a, a, a mix of probably, educational experience and then the fascination of other activities, so on and so forth. But how did we cope with the internal stress within us? We typically looked outwards. Many of us, I'm not referring to all of us, many of us would then probably very quickly walk to a temple that was at the end of our campus, hoping that there will be some solace and there will be some solution and some resolution to our challenges. So that was a starting point. And as one certainly one realized that you need to have the ability to probably absorb these shocks in life. That is one. Second is if you are also then aligned with this thought that there is karma that we have performed in earlier births that needs to be probably burnt off, which consequently would have us experience these challenges, then you then reconcile to that particular situation and environment. That to a large extent enables us to then factor in these challenges and limitations and move on in life. There is an interesting experience I had sometime in it happened in 1999. We had Pepsi and Coke that set base in India. One of my holidays in India, there was this headhunter who was keen that I should meet up with the head of Pepsi. So I went through what is known as a peer interview. Basically, there was a lady called Damindra Dias, who was quite a well-known figure those days. She was head of finance in Coke. We had dinner together. We exchanged a lot in terms of information and getting to know each other. Then I met up with the managing director of Pepsi, an American gentleman, I forget his name. He then made an offer. He said, come on board and then spend 3 years as an operations director, and then we'll move you to Atlanta when required. I then went back and thought to myself, and for whatever reason, I decided not to progress with that particular opportunity. I gave it up and came back. But there was always this nagging feeling at the back of the mind, a desire that remained unfulfilled of having some sort of a visibility in the corporate space back home in India. My and then there is this ritual that you go through, and on the 13th day, there is this person who comes and gives a lecture just to calm the minds, to try and enable us to then pick the threads and move on. And in his long spiel of wisdom that he then shared with us, he looked squarely at me and he said, we all have our desires, unfulfilled desires. And these probably would happen for various reasons. And he said, it's not that this particular opportunity of having to head an organization is available to everyone. And that doesn't mean that there are limitations in you that denies you that particular stature. It has to do with karma. So there are many such experiences in life that got one thinking and one to reconcile with many of the unachieved aspirations in life. So I don't know if I'm aligning and responding to your query, but these were some of the triggers that probably had me thinking and wondering if I should probably share these with a wider group of people. But the more critical one is, very late in life, we realize that, we need to very quickly burn off our karmas and then do all that is possible, do a lot of penance, visit some 100 temples, change our lifestyle upside down, and then try and give in charity so that we burn our karmas, and then when we go to our afterlife, we then are not then penalized. Now then what happens is we realize that we have very limited time. Spiritualism, I'm given to now understand, and based on experience I can validate, is something that can coexist with one's lifestyle, and it can be probably imbibed and aligned with very early in life, and that benefits actually. Because at the end of the day, all our challenges are within us. If we are able to try and control our minds and then accept the reality of life, reconcile and then move on, I think we are at peace with ourselves and we'll be able to probably gain a far greater traction in life. So I've gone a bit beyond your query.
Yes, Kannan, I think
whole aspect of what one has probably picked.
I think you have kind of painted the canvas of your experience right from the college days to the corporate life, and probably those experiences have given rise to the identities of some of the characters that have come about in your book. And one can understand that there is definitely a correlation between the campus life that comes to life very much in the book at various points of time, and also the visits that you have had to various pilgrimage centers have also contributed towards some of those very powerful characters that you have spoken about in the book.
Can I quickly step in there, Senthil?
Yeah.
You raised a very good point. You see, it's much later in life I realized that there are no chance occurrences. They are meant to happen. Now, I work for a company called Hindustan Liver in India, started as a management trainee there. And what they do is they put you through a rigor of field training. And then you get what is known as a subordinate charge. So I was posted as an area sales manager in the Calcutta branch. And I got to visit a place called Tarakeshwar. Tarakeshwar is on the outer perimeter of Calcutta. Then I visited a place called Srirampur. Then a place called Puri. And then someone passed on a book to me on a highly evolved soul called Mahavatar Babaji. Now, Mahavatar Babaji had one of his disciples in Srirampur, Swami Yukteswar. Then, of course, the very famous Swami Yogananda came from Calcutta, but he spent a lot of time in Tarakeshwar and Srirampur. Let's put that behind. Much later, when I was in Chennai and I was traveling somewhere, I got to visit a place called Parangipettai. Now, Parangipettai is about 130 kilometers from Chennai as you go on the East Coast Road, and it is between Chennai and Chidambaram. Parangipettai those days was known as Port Novo. Now, I stopped somewhere to have tea, and then I accidentally walked into a place which turned out to be the birthplace of Mahavatar Babaji. He was apparently born in 203 AD on the 30th of November, and there's a small dedication to him, a lovely temple that has been constructed over there. When I then later on tried to comprehend, I then realized that these series of occurrences happened for a certain reason, for one to probably comprehend this particular way of life that many of the rishis led. It is believed that he is still in a spiritual form. It's about 2,500 years now, if you count back. Difficult to then probably comprehend and believe. But then, if one has a very open mind about all this, one can at least pick aspects of that and then align with it and then move on. And there are many such stories. I mean, you go to Boganathar and then you go to Agasthyar, who are supposed to be still there in their spiritual form. In the Pudigai, we go and have a bath and have back. Apparently, there are people who have experienced life. One is not trying to strongly propagate or propound all these concepts to try and drive home the fact that these do happen. But then one needs to be open to these experiences to try and ascertain as to where one has to move on.
Actually, that takes me to another question, which is like, were you able to identify similarities in the comprehension of spiritualism across geographies? You also traveled across the world. And amongst diverse people, how does spirituality really manifest? Are they all saddled with similar issues or barriers in practicing this concept? What's your take on that?
Many of these gentlemen here on screen are based in North America, and they'll have probably and then he also, and many of you, I can see Sachindran also over there. Now, they probably will have much more to say about all this, but I can share my limited experience. Uh, when I went to China, and I went to certain parts of China, and even in South Korea, there are people who are very open to these concepts. While Buddhism is a dominant religion in parts of China, certainly in South Korea and Japan, the concept of going in to try and find a resolution to challenges and issues is a common factor across. Now, about 3 or 4 days back, the Nobel Prize for discovery of the black hole was announced for three personalities. And commonality there between spiritualism and science. And therefore, ultimately, all these, to my knowledge and experience, converge. And that's what we need to be appreciative about. And if we are able to open ourselves to that particular concept, such barriers that exist within us slowly will give way and make way. And acceptance of many of these esoteric concepts would probably be able to find acceptance in us to a certain extent.
And that's been quite a good dose on the spiritual, what I would call as a meta plane of what one would talk about in terms of the reality and the connect between karma, spirituality, and all that stuff. So now let me come to this very, very grounded narrative about your book at this point of time, in terms of your experience writing the book. What I would probably like to know is, how did the narrative really evolve and develop? Did it require seeking assistance from experienced writers or superiors? Did you have to go for multiple edits to arrive at what was acceptable to you? How was that? I mean, how did that go?
I don't want to sound presumptuous here, but it was a smooth flow. I significantly fell back on my personal experiences, characters that had formed in the mind over so many years, and therefore to then find place for them in the narrative and then try and create the story around them happened with a fair amount of ease. If at all there was this long hiatus that happened, it had to do more with myself, because I got distracted with certain other assignments and activities. And also this barrier, as I explained in the beginning, as to how it would be perceived and accepted by the publisher, and what would be the challenges one would have to overcome to eventually try and reach the other side in getting the book published. It was more the barrier of the mind that delayed the entire process.
So you were saying something, Kannan?
Okay, I'll come back to that. Now, one more question that you asked: formation of characters. From my marketing experience, the one fundamental thing that one attempts to do always is to define the demographics and psychographics. So I said the core group should be in the 18 to 45 age group. Should be probably on the verge of getting into an economic life after education. Should fairly be open to accepting these concepts or spiritualism, because the attempt is not to take an atheist and then drag the person all the way through. So having defined this, you do have a spillover effect on either side, people who are fairly older who will then get to read this book. But defined as a core audience, the objective of trying to convey that this is not something that is complex. In the sense, you don't have to probably change your lifestyle completely, spend material time in over and above the time that you spend on your normal work to then imbibe and move in this path of spiritualism. It very, very, very smoothly coexists with lifestyle. And was the thought and creation of There's pretty narrative definition, defining the characters. And as I said, many of the characters were existing at the subconscious mind, and therefore to then find place for them in the narrative was possible.
In your book, normally when you look at spirituality, it is perceived as a path of enlightened few people. When you talk about spirituality, I never normally get associated with that at all, normally. Okay. And that too after a certain age. In your book, particularly, when you see this character Jainder Sharma seeking spiritual insights while dealing with his real life challenges, it could even be the boy-girl relationship, or it could be with his roommates, it could be with anybody. Can we take it that even youngsters can indeed take spirituality in their day-to-day lives? What's your feeling?
I can go back to our campus experience, the sort of challenges that we had to experience ourselves, and the abilities that we had to then bring forth to try and address them. That is one part. Second is, if you look at the wider environment, the sort of conflicts that seem to exist, the sort of challenges that people seem to experience all around us, very clearly conveys that, and the emergence of spiritual gurus all around. Certainly, you have many of them gaining a lot of traction and prominence. Fundamentally, primarily due to the reach of social media, but not to take away the fact that there is this huge expanding market for spiritualism. I'm using the term market not in a derogatory sense, but people are fascinated on the one end by this particular concept, but there is also a huge need that seems to manifest for this particular concept. And one thing I can share with you, it has nothing to do with religion. It is agnostic. It basically provides a secular method of trying to have it coexist with your regular activities and provide benefits. Because I'm a firm believer that most of our problems are within us, be it ailments, be it mental challenges, be it setbacks, they're all within us. If we are able to moderate, I think we'll get a fair amount of traction and probably lead a much more comfortable.
One of those common perceptions could be that if you've got to be spiritual, you need to be religious, or it's essential to embark on a religious path prior to migrating to a spiritual path. Can they coexist actually? Is it possible? If a readership that seeks rational substantiation, can we have suitable validations to satisfy their queries? What do you think?
Sorry, come to the second part. Religion I picked. After that, what was the question?
So the next question is, to a younger readership that seeks rational substantiation,
okay.
can we have suitable validations to satisfy their query? They are always looking for logic, clear, a scientific background to everything, and they would like to really get the facts right on the table before they believe anything at all.
Yeah. Please indulge me now. I'm slightly a bit deeper. There is a lovely book by Osho, Rajneesh. Unfortunately, he was known for all the wrong reasons. But he came out with something that stuck in my mind. He said, we have something called instinct, which we all know. We have something called intellect, and we have something called intuition. He said, how do you then try and ascertain as to what is important? He says, what happens is people normally believe that intellect is the ultimate. But intellect deals with something of the past and maybe just about the present. Meaning what has happened in the past is something that is then captured, is then passed on, we then pick that. And it freezes there. If you take instinct, instinct is the one that manages the circulation of blood in our body, our digestion system, our breathing, and everything else. For example, if you're fast asleep and we forget to breathe, we pass away. But an instinct ensures that that particular activity carries on smoothly. So he said, never, never try and hurt instinct. And the example he takes there is, don't say that I'm going to fast for the next 15 days and I won't drink water. He said, you're then hurting your instinct. Always nurture it. And what is being said today is take care of your health. That's fundamental. Intellect, he says, don't rest over that. He says, use intellect to then migrate to a space that enables you to become intuitive. And how do we do that? He says, there is only one activity that gets controlled by both your instinct and your intellect, and that is breathing. If you sleep peacefully, you keep breathing. However, you can control breathing. You say for the next 2 seconds, I'm going to hold my breath. You're able to control it. Now let's come to the second part. What happens when suddenly a snake appears in front of you? What happens when something very exciting happens to you? What happens when you're listening to, say, Ilayaraja's music? Your mind calms down and you're in a very different frequency. The breathing patterns keep changing. So you said if you reverse the whole thing and use breathing to then control your mind, you're achieving traction. So that rationalizes yoga. It rationalizes breathing as to how it's very important. Pranayama, as they keep calling, as so that becomes very important for you to gain control over your mind. So that, sunk deep in me, and I've used it in certain lectures where the youngsters are able to then comprehend and subscribe to it. There are many examples, but this to me sounded very rational. Yeah. And I come to the first question now about religion. I don't think it's essential. Because as I told you, go to Korea, go to China. We sitting here, we believe that China is a country of people who are atheists. But the interesting part is if you go back into history, there's a lovely book on Babaji that I read, which talks about going back beyond 10,000 years, there are people who have actually walked across to China, propagated concepts in medicine, in philosophy. And then there are people from China who also come here. So this particular relationship goes back in time. That is one. Second is, they also have their method of breathing, which they use effectively to control their mind. There are, for example, provinces where on the road in the morning, the traffic is blocked completely. And you have senior citizens who come on road and they practice this particular method of breathing. They don't call it yoga, but then they have their own names for it. But the concepts remain the same. And therefore, I don't think religion has to do anything to do with this particular practice. It's agnostic.
Great, wonderful. That I think would answer the question to a lot of youngsters very, very clearly. Because the moment many a time you talk about religion, then that puts off people. At least the youngsters, they have different views on it, and so it takes some time for them to get closer to that topic and such. Yeah, this was your maiden, effort in terms of writing this book. As you went through your writing, it's but common that, during your maiden work like this, you could get into what is called as a writer's block, right? Did you, in the last 3 years when this book was in the making, ever experience that, and what was it that you actually go through?
Asking me very sensitive questions now. Anyway, let me expose my limitation. To an extent, yes. There are times when I would progress and cover, say, n number of pages and realize that maybe it was not substantial. But I didn't let that ways and methods of adding on pages. What I certainly did was to try and reinforce certain characters. And therefore, I had to go back and then write some additional chapters to pick certain characters and then try and build them in a certain manner so that the entire personality would then come to the fore and get comprehended. So to that extent, yes, I did revisit. In terms of edits, there wasn't much. The edit happened more with proofreading, which I'll come to separately towards the end. characters have touched, edits have told you. Uh, the entire flow, if you go through, there are certain aspects that you'll realize I've taken liberties. For example, I've given a recipe in one of the pages. Do try and see what comes out of it. In my experience, it comes out exceedingly well. And that stuck in my mind. I picked it from an elder in the family, and I thought I should fit it in. It slipped in beautifully, and it fitted in. So the point I'm trying to make is there has been an element of an unconventional approach, aspects that would traditionally not find place in a narrative and a flow have been fitted in. You will still find aspects that stand out, and that's probably got to do with my limitation as a writer and an author. But otherwise, to come back to your query, there were no blocks that one experienced, but one did revisit to try and reinforce the characters. And there was this nagging feeling that the book would not be adequate if a certain number of pages would not be then filled up and covered.
That gives a lot of strength and kind of an inspiration to somebody who can attempt to get at this writing a book at some point of time. With so many of us around in your own batch, in our own batch, who got a wealth of experience in each of their lives, can certainly take inspiration from these words, Kannan. Tell us your experience with the publishers. In these days where one is looking at snacky content, as I would put it, snacky appeal rather, and high commercial value. How was the experience with the publishers, and how did you really meet up on those demands?
Senthil, let's go back to it's an experience we all have. There is a lot of democratization that's happened in various aspects of life. Now, when all of us were in a campus life, we knew only limited singers. Let's take light music, for example. You take Hindi music, you had a Lata Mangeshkar, you had Asha Bose, you had a Kishore Kumar, you had a Mohammad Rafi. You take up Tamil, you had T.M. Soundarajan, you had S.P. Balasubramanian, and the ladies, the 2 or 3 ladies who existed. And a couple of music directors here and there. Came your this thing reality shows on television. It spewed out talent, and it spewed out talent with such intensity that suddenly the scene exploded. I'm given to believe today that if you want to perform and render for a film, you have talents galore, and therefore the rates have crashed. But that has got democratized. Talent today finds place with a fair amount of comfort. Similar thing has happened in other reality shows that has led to probably a lot of talent coming in. Something similar seems to be happening in the publishing world also, with the Amazons of the world and equivalent today providing you an opportunity to write your own book. And they provide you a platform to access geographies that conventionally were not available. For example, if you wrote a book in India, even if you're a very good author, you would align with one publisher. The one publisher would probably give you access to a limited distribution system. There would be limited visibility, and you'd look at a small reach. But take the case of, let's say, Chetan Bhagat, for example, passed out of IIT Delhi. I don't subscribe to that first book he wrote. I don't think it had much quality in it. But look what happened to him. Limited access, but suddenly someone picked the book and said, look, I'm going to convert this into a movie. There was a huge change from what he wrote and what the movie ended up being. But look at him. Today, he is able to then churn out books at free will pleasure. And like him, it has led to many authors. You like Devdutt Patnaik, who writes some brilliant stuff on religion mainly. You have niches that are today occupied by names that were not very well known, say, just a few months or a few years back. So I think the entire space has got democratized, and technology is a huge enabler. Even if you look at all of us now, we are in different time zones. We are in different geographies. We are able to now link up and then have this sort of a discussion, which we otherwise would not have had at all. And that seems to be happening all across. And it'll only keep growing with time. And a lot of people who have this desire to try and probably have their inner talent manifested, I think the opportunities are now hugely available. I mean, take my case. I mean, I would not have otherwise been accepted anywhere. I managed to push one through, whether it's for the publisher and for the market. I think the opportunities are huge. So democratization probably is the terminology that one would use there.
Right. Now I'm going to ask you a question where I want your honest appraisal of your intent and what you see as the outcome of how your intent has been executed. Which is, when you decided to write the book, you had an intent, right? And now that the book has been published and you have some reviews, you have some feedback from people and your own experience of what people are going through in terms of leadership. What do you think? Where are you on the outcome after publishing? Vis-a-vis your intent before writing the book.
Okay, Senthil, I'll share one experience with you, and something similar happened now also. Once I was flying from Bombay to Calcutta, this was many years back, and we suddenly hit an air pocket. As we were, you go from west to the northeast. You were flying over central India, and suddenly we hit an air pocket. It was pouring heavily outside, and the aircraft suddenly threw up and then came down. And I'm talking about from the mean upward movement of say 5,000 feet, and suddenly a plunge of over 15,000 feet. In that few seconds that one experienced, one switched off completely. And this made an experience. In the sense, I said, okay, finished. Let me accept it and then accept the eventuality. So when I got closer to completing the book, the attitude was, let's now take it on and see whatever happens and take its logical course. Orientation, and one just switched off after pushing the book through. But I was quite surprised, and I felt quite encouraged with the reviews that came through. There is this lady who has a following over 20,000, who apparently is quite critical with the review and comments, and she makes it a point to pick books at random and then review them. And she has a stature with, say, Amazon and other platforms. And she came into the first review. And I mean, since the name was not known to me and I was not very conversant with this, I didn't even look at it till someone pointed out and said, look, it seems to be a favorable review. And one thing led to another. And most of the reviews were probably more than what I expected in terms of the way they encouraged and one's writing. Even you came out with something very interesting, so did Tram. So I felt, okay, it isn't all that bad. Probably one is not probably at the lowest end of the continuum. One can probably be somewhere in the middle. It only encourages one to then attempt something else moving forward. But coming back to the commercial part, initial days, the electronic version seems to be gaining some traction. We are having logistics problems in the US. I'll give you the commercial aspect. The cost of logistics, moving the book from, say, Chennai to even the West Coast or to the East Coast, is frightfully expensive. And that one seeks to crack, but it's more to do with the publisher. They need to find solutions. So other than the logistics challenges, there seems to be some amount of movement. I wouldn't call it by any stretch of imagination a commercial success, but that's not one aspired for. The limited aspiration of getting the book published has happened, and therefore one is sitting back and watching as to what happens.
So let me catch you back on the same question in a different way, because I don't think I've got the answer fully on this one. So I'm going to badger you again with a question. The intent, was it commercial? Was the intent to reach a message? I'm sure it's a hybrid of both, but my question is, with the basic intent of reaching out to people in terms of a message on spirituality in a very interesting way, an interesting story format. Could have been an intent. And along with it, of course, a commercial thing could also have been there. So my question is, if I were to ask you, is the mission accomplished? What would be your answer?
Okay, let's handle the commercial part first. Senthil, the book costs 290 rupees in India. The electronic version costs about 99 rupees today. The royalty for me per book is around 25 rupees or 30 rupees. So 30 rupees multiplied by any number of copies. On the outer side, one can earn about 300,000 over a year or whatever. And therefore, you will realize that it is not a huge motivator. Nothing comes out of it. So one was not aspiring for any form of commercial benefits, but the satisfaction of having probably written a book was to a large extent satiated. Somewhere deep inside, there was this feeling that to whatever little extent one could, one should attempt to probably try and address, and that to a large extent got satisfied in propagating the concept of spiritualism. So that object, if you now take on, that would be foremost. It's a trigger. It will probably touch the small component of the target group.
Okay. So if I have to think about writing a book, and today you got scores of material available or questions being asked, with fabulous offers which says you can become an author in a week's time. It's a templated world where you can write ebooks, you can author a book within a specific number of time, and there is so much that is being talked about in terms of making an author overnight in whatever way it is possible. What's your take on that? Subjects like this, in subjects like this, which requires, as you said, it was the seeds of this theme was sown some time back in your life, and you have been thinking about it, mulling over it, going through your experiences, having your own reflections and thoughts, and finally, at this point of time in your life, you've taken the plunge to put it all in the form of a book. Now, if somebody wants to become an author today, they can seek the guidance from, where, the digital world, to get some templated ways of actually writing a book and just be done with it. What's your take on that, that kind of a practice that is happening, and is it at all possible to be a venerable author at it in terms of being able to make a sound impression and a deep impression on the reader?
Let me restrict my response to personal approach. I personally believe that whatever one takes on, one has to probably provide value. This is born out of more with the experience I've had in business. I was in the private equity space for over 8 years with HSBC. What I referred to was, I will respond it from my own personal view, not to try and address it broadly. I'm a proponent of creating value in whatever one gets involved, and this is something that hold me in good stead in my corporate life. And therefore, even when one attempted this book, there has to be a theme that that you'll have to buy into and believe in. It can't be something that is purely commercially oriented. For example, you would not write a Mills and Boons or a Robert Ludlum to try and achieve some commercial success. If you firmly believe that this particular space, one is relevant, but more importantly, you can provide some value and some insights, then one should attempt that. And that's been the whole approach. Or else it was a huge gamble to try and dwell in fictional spiritualism, because fact remains that I am not evolved at all. I'm a very ordinary person like all of us, many of us. And what one was attempting was a space where people had probably dug deep into. You take all the famous Sri Ravi Shankar, you take all the evolved souls who today are able to try and use that effectively to provide solace and learning to many people. One is nowhere closer to them. But you subscribe to these certain core beliefs and you try and develop something around that, maybe you're able to gain a lot of traction. And that's what one attempted.
And then I think, thanks for that, because, this is very important in today's world. There's so much of, noise getting created, wherein there are so many shortcuts available for doing many things, and including the one of writing a book as well. So thanks for this insight and your own views on this one. Helps a lot. At least to tell youngsters it's not so. It's a journey that one has to undertake to be able to put thoughts onto the paper and the paper making meaning. Now, firstly, my request to you is please come back on the video. I would like to see you here. Let's see if the bandwidth challenges us again. So that we can get back. Yeah, that's nice. That's good.
Okay, yeah.
So my last question to you, Kannan. This is like, say, when Basha comes, or any of this movie Bahubali comes, they ask, is there going to be a sequel to Bahubali 1? Bahubali 2? Is there going to be a sequel to Boston Brahmin?
I honestly don't know. There is a lot of content that is available. And there can be even a prequel, but then it all depends upon how this particular first book has been accepted. If it gains some traction, certainly there'll be a motivation to attempt the second one. So at this point in time, I'm not very sure. Let's see how it happens. Yeah.
Great, Kannan, and I think there have been some very interesting comments coming from people as well, and there are about 25 participants here today. Good number, I should say, for a web session like this, considering Saturday with CSK match going on. But before I turn it on to the participants to ask you questions, I would like to have the privilege of getting out my book review of Boston Brahmin. And it goes like this. The Boston Brahmin turned out to be a page turner. It's a gripping reality that interweaves a worldly life with a spiritual voyage of self-discovery. The characters are well anchored with unique identities that I could feel myself as an invisible observer of Jay's family traveling all along with them. I like the punctuated intersections of the spiritual exploration of the Boston Brahmin. A stunning quote on trust where Baba says, "Trust everyone to your affordable level," is etched deeply in you. The affordability is all about the ability to absorb the shock of a mishap in trust. What a unique comprehension of the meaning. I have listed this quote in my mind for a deeper inner reflection. Kannan, let this world be treated to more such spiritual enlightenment, woven around events and happenings that one can relate to. Come out with more of your writings like this. Boston Brahmin has made an impressive mark in the line of reality fiction. Kannan Srinivasan has brought out a writing that can engage the young and the elder generation with equal interest. That's about all that I have got to say about the book. Kannan, you have anything to say?
Yeah, I'm very, very, very grateful for those very kind and good words, and for probably for the questions that you have had for this interaction. And I'm also very grateful to Sombu. The sort of interest he took, he in fact pushed me to prepare for this particular interaction, and I'm very grateful to you. I don't think on my own I would have probably reached out to try and share my thoughts. And I'm also grateful to everyone for the interest that you've shown in the past, say, half an hour. to try and comprehend some of what this book tries to convey. Thank you so much. Very grateful.
Hey guys, now
Welcome, Suresh.
yeah.
Hey, great to listen to you.
Thanks, Senthil. Now the floor is open, guys. Just unmute yourself and let's have interactions with Kannan.
Hey,
Lots of
Kannan, Jabi here. Great
Yeah,
to
Jab.
listen to you. Great to listen to you. I'm intrigued by the title of the book, Boston Brahmin. I think there is a terminology associated with it historically with Boston Brahmins. They're supposed to be very upper class people or something different. Well, how did you pick the title? It's very interesting.
Jabi, there are two aspects to this. One, of course, since I spent some time in Boston and I got to accidentally learn about these people, that registered in the mind. The title turned out quite attractive and catchy. That is, I'll be honest about that part. But the third part is these people, that particular clan is still existent, I believe, along the East Coast between Boston and New York. It's referred to as New England, apparently. Now, these were a set of people who were philanthropists, and they basically gave out a lot for development of education, art, culture, and literature. The institutions of repute over there have all been funded by them. And there is a continuous thread that exists between such personalities and similar personalities existing worldwide, even including our country. The Karaikudi University that's come up, put up by the Chettiars, the various philanthropic activities in terms of hospitals and institutions across our country, all have come up because of similar mindsets. And certainly the undertone and the underlying current that links up everyone is spiritualism. That's my belief, and therefore I picked on this particular title.
Thank you. Thanks for answering.
Hi, Kannan. This is Balchandar. I was really surprised to see a flashy, stylish Kannan in my college days to come up with something in spirituality. I mean, I was thought initially it is a management, funda. So I started reading with that in background. I didn't know that it's going to lead you to spiritual things. And I'm surprised to see a totally different Kannan, so mellowed down and so quiet and calm. So particular about what he is talking about. And I'm really surprised to see a different Kannan after so many years. In fact, this is the first time I'm talking to people. I have not seen, I just had some few messages here and there, but never talked to you personally. This has been a different Kannan altogether. When did this change happen? I mean, this is...
When you get thrashed in life,
good question.
either evolve as a better person. But I guess it has to do with the process that you go through in life over the years. We are now going back, almost 40 years now. So I guess all of us would have probably changed in different ways. But thanks for saying that. So good things, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Kannan.
Okay, Chinchali, go ahead.
Hi, Kannan. This is Chinchali.
Venkat.
I want to ask you a question regarding the motivation behind writing this book. So was it to encapsulate your experiences as a seeker? Was that the primary motivation?
No, since I went through this, I have been going through this experience. I only felt that it would be useful to try and share this widely. Particularly if the younger generation would subscribe to it, it would certainly be beneficial and useful. Because clearly, half our ailments, half the challenges in life are on account of a very disturbed mind. And if we calm the mind, I think there's a lot that can be addressed. Now, fascinating part, Albert Einstein, I started reading his biography and then I saw one movie on him. He apparently, we all know it, the concept of relativity, it occurred to him as a flash of thought. And then it took the next 10 years of reverse engineering to try and establish to his fraternity as to how he arrived at that particular conclusion. Ramanujan had a similar experience. Every time an equation was written on the board, he gave a solution. And he got admonished for it. Finally, when he was asked, how the hell did you then come with that particular response? He said, look, don't ask me. It happens to me. It just comes out. Now, that subsequently, when one read on spiritualism by various authors, what they're clearly saying is, between your mind and the self, you have the mind that is disturbed and perpetually distracted. If you silence it, the truth keeps manifesting. And if you subscribe to that, you invariably are on track with your responses. The third one is about Zen masters I was reading somewhere. Two Zen masters, if they get into a sword fight, no one loses. Apparently it goes on perpetually. Because their entire action of theirs is driven by the inner self and not contaminated by the mind. So these are some of the things that were there at the subconscious level when one attempted to write this particular book. The thought was how to convey it, and therefore an element of color that was added in terms of affairs and whatever else. And the idea was not to provide an overdose of spiritualism, because to me, spiritualism is a very different language. Now imagine suddenly we are tomorrow to learn Marathi in say 1 month. In addition to learning a new language in 1 month, there are new concepts to be then try and imbibe. It's very complex. So any book on spiritualism to me personally has been challenging to that extent. I read a book by this a very popular gentleman who comes on television in India, a political commentator, a former IAS officer. He's written a book on Adi Shakti. I started reading. After the first 30 pages, I put it off because I had to keep a dictionary alongside to try and understand the meaning of some of the terminology he used. So what happens is in this flow, you have these road bumps and you're focused on trying to work around them, and the core essence of what is being conveyed goes over there. So the idea was to just convey a few things on spiritualism. Therefore, it is interspersed with the story itself, and it is far and few. So that if that is imbibed, if it triggers interest in someone and they move on this particular path, maybe they can pick more. So does it respond to this? Is that the response that you would expect, Charlie?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Kannan, this is B. Ramesh. I really enjoyed the book. I was kind of curious about the choice of the genre that you chose, viewpoints of different characters that probably relate to those in your own life. So did you pick the genre so that different readers could identify with some of these characters and see this, the vision you have in your head on what you're trying to convey?
Any particular character you can pick, then we can develop on it. Do you have any?
No, well, I was talking about the reason why you chose this particular way of storytelling.
Okay. All this, as I said earlier, was strongly influenced by my own personal experiences. There was someone who had a profound influence on me. I still regard that person very highly, and therefore the anchor character therefore was there at the back of the mind, which I would fall back on and use to then develop this narrative. The protagonist again was created around someone I know very well. So yes, these are characters that one has interacted with, experienced in life, and therefore they were easier to then try and use in this particular narrative.
Hey, thank you, guys. I mean, I was just curious because normally, unmute. Normally, எனக்கு தெரியாம ஒண்ணுமே நடக்காது. But Sombu in the case la வந்து எனக்கு தெரியாம I was just curious to know, what has happened. Absolutely, and I was also not aware that Senthil was, was in touch with you and things like that. Absolutely. Now on I just Google search and Amazon la I think ஃபர்ஸ்ட் ஃபியூ சாப்டர்ஸ் என்னால் படிக்க முடிஞ்சது. என்னடா அது கண்ணன் சீனிவாசனா இந்த புக்கு எழுதுனா? I mean, the language and things were just, something out of the world. And I'm also really, I appreciate, Kannan. I mean, this book was not written on commercial, and, it has to reach a larger audience. And I'm sure the book is young, and I'm sure, the content is I mean, people will realize, I mean, when they read that, I mean, it's got more to offer than what it means. And you're going to write many more books for us. And Kannan Srinivasan book write பண்ணான்னு முதல்ல ஒன்று தோணுச்சு. But ஆனால் the over the years, the exposure you have had and all that, I think, is reflected in the book. And hats off to you, Kannan. And I mean, we all encourage you to write more books. Absolutely.
Anand, very grateful for those very kind words.
Incident that happened that basically was like very, very revealing to you.
Are you referring to any personal experiences?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me do the latest one. In February, I was in Sri Lanka. I have some very dear friends over there. We traveled from Colombo down to the southern tip of Sri Lanka. There is this place called Katragama. Katragama in Tamil is known as Kadir Gramam. And there is a temple dedicated to Lord Muruga. And it's an interesting complex. If you take a rectangle, on the smaller axis, one end, there's a smaller rectangle that goes. On the opposite end, on the smaller rectangle, there is a Buddhist monastery. In between, there is a kilometer-long link road, which you traverse from one end to the other. So this friend being a Buddhist, we first went to the monastery. We went around. He gave me about a bunch of agarbattis. He said, light these agarbattis and poke them on that bed over there.
Should be the one who will be transmitting anything to you.
I took the bunch and I said, where is the matchbox for it? So he looked at me. Suddenly on the bed, the existing agarbattis lit up. Now, it didn't hit me at all. So I then took my bunch, poked them, and then I came off. As we were walking back on this particular track towards the temple, suddenly from somewhere I heard a voice. It said, come over and seek your blessings. Now I ignored it because I couldn't see anyone. I went past, suddenly that person again called me, and this turned out to be a Buddhist monk who was seated on top of a platform facing the opposite direction. He couldn't have seen me. And he then tied this on my arm. He uttered some shloka on Rahu and Ketu and gave it to me. Even that didn't register in the mind. We kept walking after that. There is an elderly gentleman from an economically weaker section came limping towards us, stretched out his arm. I mean, promptly we put our hands in our pocket, pulled out some money and gave it to him. This is when my friend, as we walked, he tapped me and he said, turn back immediately. I turned back and he said, can you see the person? I said, no, I can't. And this was giant, only 3 or 4 seconds. It's difficult for someone to disappear in 3-4 seconds. This was fascinating. And next to the temple is where Mahaavatar Babaji sat for over 6 months and meditated under the tutelage of Boganathar. So there's a lovely temple over there. But what I'm sharing with you is these are experiences that were fascinating. But the interesting part is, one was not taken away by them. You just registered that and moved on in life. Probably, that's what the mind does to you. If you're able to calm, maybe the truth keeps manifesting and you're able to accept it.
You said that you are very, you don't know how the talk came about. And again, a lot of incidents have happened in our lives for all of us to be at this moment, at this time on the Zoom call. And I want to just share with you one of the writings of Wayne Dyer, where he says, there are no accidents in life, only incidents. So the incident in life was, we were all destined to hear your talk. We were all destined to be here. And again, my thanks to Suresh and everyone else for organizing this. It's a divine blessing. Thank you all.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and a privilege to reassociate.
I just want to comment on Kannan and Senthil on the format of today's discussions. I tuned in a bit late for this meeting, and the first thing I realized was maybe I was in the battlefield of Mahabharata, in the midst of a discourse between Krishna and Arjuna here.
You take it to a different level altogether.
Also, I think Sombu, we had the largest participation today of 24 one point of time.
Yes, guys,
Otherwise,
it takes a
having
lot.
it 18.
Yeah, guys, it takes a lot of effort. So we need to popularize this. There are some regulars, right? If I'm spamming you with the messages, it is to drag us all together towards it, right? Anand started this whole thing. We are just carrying it through.